We don't have introductions for the rest of the panel. Why don't we do 10 seconds for each of you? Eric, you start.
I'm Erik Brynjolfsson. I'm a professor at Stanford, came over from MIT, head of the Digital Economy Lab at Stanford, an economist who's very excited about the AI revolution.
I'm Barbara Pender. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. I work with Accenture with consulting clients. I lead the Gen AI, large language model for the Center of Excellence at Accenture. Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Maggioncalda, the CEO of Coursera. A couple days ago, I celebrated my 6-year anniversary. This is my first JFF Horizons event, and it is awesome. So thank you very much for having me here.
Great. So I want to start with a confession, which is maybe not the confession that they wanted me to make when they asked me to moderate this panel, which is that I'm a little bit bored by the state of the conversation about AI. Because I feel like too many people, and frankly, I'm talking about my own profession here, put themselves into one of two camps. They are either in the camp of, this is perfect and it's going to save the world in the future, or we're all going to die. And the problem with those two camps, to me, well, there's several problems. One is that we don't live in utopia or dystopia, and we never have lived in utopia or dystopia. The world is always going to be messy, and so I have a little bit of an itchiness, a little bit of an allergy whenever I hear people say the future is going to be either utopia or we're all going to die. The second is, as a journalist, I love reporting on things, and you can't report on the future. There is no data from the future that you can report on. So I'm seeing this panel as a little bit of like a 2x2 matrix. I want to talk about the present, and then of course at the end I want to talk about the future. And then I want to talk about optimism, and I want to talk about pessimism. So that is my sort of 2x2 matrix with which I'm going to operate on this panel. Jeff, let's start with you. I want to understand at the nittiest, grittiest level how Coursera is currently using generative AI right now.
So in a few ways, we're just launching Coach, which is a personalized learning assistant. It's actually rolling out now, so learners are actually using it. What I really like about it is that it's ChatGPT, but it doesn't really rely on ChatGPT for the content expertise. It's really the language expertise. So it's like having a TA who got an A in every course on Coursera, who can explain things to learners in multiple languages, give personal examples. It's personalized interactive learning. So that's happening now. Course Builder, which is using generative AI to build curriculum outlines and actually remix content, is happening right now. It's not in the hands of customers yet. Language translations are happening now. So 2,500 courses will be translated into 7 different languages, creating much more equitable access and removing language barriers. That's happening right now. We're obviously putting content on Coursera from Erik and others who are experts at this, and that's happening now. And then we're using it to run Coursera. I use it all the time, and that's happening now as well.
So essentially, if I'm a student who speaks Spanish and I want to take a class on microeconomics, and microeconomics is a little bit complicated, and so I have some questions I want to ask, I can talk to this machine. I can talk to this essentially a TA who got an A in the class, who never sleeps. I can ask it questions whenever I want, and the questions can be interpreted back into Spanish seamlessly. That is essentially the technology you've been able to roll out with AI.
Yeah, two things. First, the course will be available in Spanish, which many courses are not today, and many other languages. I assume within 12 months, 20, 40 languages. The models are getting very, very good at language translation. And then to your point around the TA, yeah, it's personalized and available to you and grounded in the course. If you ask a question that's not related to the course, it'll say, I'm not here to help you with that. Let's talk about the course, like a TA would.
Barbara, it's very common now to see reports of, either in the news or from parents, kids cheating, which is a reminder of the fact that even though this technology is wondrous, just because the technology is incredibly useful doesn't mean it will always be used for ethical ends. So I would love you to comment a little bit on how you and your job think about ethical AI. How do you ensure that this just manifestly competent technology can be used ethically?
So first, I'd like to really relay the generative AI term is not Latin for copy and paste. Across the board, kids and adults. And I think that's where we tend to go wrong when we are trying to retrieve information, whether it's in our lane of expertise or we want to find out something new in a different area. So if we remember that once we use the right prompting, the right keywords for what we're asking for, and it comes back to you, know that we expect you to do your wordsmithing. We expect you to make it your own so that it sounds like you when it's delivered. Because for every output, there is an extension of a program, if you will. Let's think of Chrome and all of the extensions that are up there that helps us. There's an extension to verify if that information was generated by ChatGPT or generative AI. So when we think about responsible AI, it is the ethics component that we have to pause on. How do you want to be delivered? How do you want to be represented when you are building your own center of excellence, which I'm pretty sure everyone here is going to benefit from putting together your own center of excellence in a box, right? And if not, you should. And then you get the right people around the table, do a think tank, do a brain trust. This morning we talked about questions and fears. Talk them out. Everyone has something to say about it, and do the best that you can to help remove the fear. But just slow it down 1 second and make sure that you're putting something responsible in place for your company and for your brand.
Erik, it's unbelievable to think that ChatGPT has really only existed for like 8 months. I mean, from like a developmental psychology perspective, this thing can barely walk. And it has 1 billion users around the world. It's all a lot of people can talk about. Do we know anything from a research perspective about how large language models, LLMs, actually help people be more productive?
Just starting, and building on what Barbara said, there's a bunch of research in laboratories, but just recently we completed a study I did with Danielle Lee and Lindsay Raymond at MIT, looking at a large language model in the field in a large call center. And the nice thing about it from a researcher's perspective was they rolled it out in a way that we got kind of a natural experiment. Some people got the technology, other people didn't. And what we found was that the people got the technology were dramatically more productive, about 14% on average. But interestingly, the least skilled workers got the biggest boost, about a 35% boost. The tool was augmenting them, as Barbara was saying. It wasn't trying to replace them. We also found that the customers liked it better. We did a sentiment analysis. We saw a lot more happy words and fewer angry words in those transcripts. Employees liked it better. There was less turnover by it. So this was a big win for all the different parties in that. And I actually think it's representative of what we'll be seeing in a lot of other applications. This was in a call center, but we're seeing anecdotes of similar things happening in law firms, in medical offices, in investment banks, in people writing ad copy. So it's going to have a pretty broad effect on the economy.
Right. Jeff, Erik just said that this technology is particularly useful for people who don't have a lot of experience, who are just getting in on the job. Surely, as the CEO of a company, you've never used a large language model to help you with strategy, have you?
So I'll just sort of public message, and I'll be totally honest about this. I've been using ChatGPT since it first came out, but there are a couple of innovations that have changed the way I've been using it that are startlingly capable. With GPT-4 and something called the Playground from OpenAI, you can load in context of up to 40,000 tokens, which is probably about 30,000 words. What I routinely do now, you could also store your prompts. So what I do is I loaded in my whole 10K, which is the business description of Coursera. I loaded in all of our 3-year plans, all of our 1-year plans, and all the OKRs for the next 90 days. That's the context. Now, GPT understands Coursera. Then I'll take, McKinsey just came out with a report yesterday. I loaded that report in, and now GPT knows everything about Coursera, at least a summary form of the most important things. It has essentially read a summary of the McKinsey report, and now I say, what are the implications of this report for my company? It is incredibly capable, incredibly capable.
Yeah, what I would add is, my job in many ways is to be an explanatory journalist. I try to come up sometimes with effective metaphors or analogies for complicated ideas. And around the time that Silicon Valley Bank was failing, and everywhere in the news, people were talking about fractional banking and bank runs and the dynamic of bank runs. And I said, I have a cheeky idea. I'm going to ask ChatGPT, describe to me a bank run in a way that a 5-year-old could understand it. And here's what I got back. Imagine there's a kindergarten class with a jar of cookies at the front of the class that the teacher hands out to the students if they're good. There's never enough cookies in the jar to feed the entire class at any one given time. One day, there's a rumor that breaks out in the kindergarten class that the cookie jar system of delivering deposited cookies is going to go away. So all the students run to the front of the class, take the cookie jar, smash it on the ground, and grab the cookies. Note that there are never, at any given time, enough cookies to feed all the children in the kindergarten class at once. And so, through this bank run of cookies, the students, the children, have not only exhausted the supply of cookies, but also destroyed the mechanism by which cookies are distributed to the kindergarten class. I was like, that's unbelievably good. I mean, if you gave me 10 years, I'm not sure I could come up with something that's that sort of exquisitely appropriate for getting a 5-year-old to understand the dynamics of fractional banking. Barbara, back to you, and sort of pivoting off of these ideas, I do think there is a lot of fear, a lot of very reasonable fear, that you take a technology that can do fractional banking metaphors as it did to me, and I think, wow, in a year, in 2 years, this is going to be doing my job. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about this conversation about this technology is replacing work versus this technology is making more productive the workers that we have?
Absolutely. And it is the latter, and it should be the latter. So the fear is expected, it's warranted, right? But if you are utilizing Gen AI correctly, it is not meant to replace you. It is meant to lift and leverage your productivity to do a better job, to move on to something else, promotion, if you will. Let's speak money, let's speak revenue, and to streamline some of the mundane tasks that you utilize. I'll use Copilot as an example because hopefully by the time I go to bed, I'll have access to it. I'm waiting for it. But Copilot, as an example, coming back from PTO, who takes a 1-week, 2-week PTO and has to come back to 300 to 500 plus emails. And if you are coming back the way that I did with this assignment on my agenda, I need to pull out all emails that have to do with Horizon JFF, right? It's probably at the bottom, in the middle, or wherever. But that's what Copilot is, and that's how it's increasing my productivity. I am still not through my emails, but if I had Gen AI or Copilot, it will make me more productive in that manner. So think about how it is going to make you more productive. Think about the people that you onboard, that you have to train. I do that as well. And streamlining that documentation to cover exactly what you need. Because everybody in this room knows that when you're onboarding someone, you need to do it within 48 to 72 hours. That's our manager mentality. Yeah, it takes 2 weeks, but can you ramp it up? Can you hurry up? Because I need you to work on this or work on that. And so it is to increase your productivity by, let's say, 40%. If it starts to remove jobs or a job of employees or a team, you should question the job that they were doing.
Erik, pivoting off of this, do we have a good understanding of the jobs that are most likely to be affected by this kind of technology? Like, surely there are jobs out there, neurosurgeon, where there's just no way that ChatGPT has anything to do with replacing those who are working on brain surgery. But then at the same time, IBM announced that they're not going to hire, 7,000, 8,000 people, because they think that their current workforce can do the job of a marginal 8,000 people with this kind of technology. So give us a sense of, from your understanding, what jobs are most sensitive and what jobs might be least sensitive to being impacted by this tech?
Well, first off, I'm glad you used the word affected, impacted. as opposed to replaced. Because I think one of the biggest misconceptions, as Barbara was just saying, is that this is like going to lead to some mass unemployment. The call center example, the other examples, is mainly augmenting, and that's where most of the value comes from. It's not really ready for prime time to do these things by itself. You want to have a human in the loop evaluating things. And you're right, it's far from general doing all the different tasks that humans do. There are some things, physical tasks, obviously that has a lot of difficulty with, but things involving language, which is a lot, your job, my job, all of our jobs, are going to be significantly affected. And I think turbocharged. So that's about 60% of the US workforce that primarily are information and knowledge workers. But ultimately, the right way to think about it is not so much at the level of jobs, it's going down one level to tasks. Most jobs consist of 20 to 30 distinct tasks. A radiologist looks at images, but they also talk to patients, they coordinate care with other doctors. They have about 25 different tasks that they do. If you look at the individual tasks, you see that almost every job has some part of it that's going to be affected. A nurse has to read notes, but she also does some work with, physically. Truck drivers sometimes have to do work. Other people do a lot of information and knowledge work. We have a rubric where we've gone through the economy and we see transformation in almost every sector. There's basically no job that isn't affected at least a little bit. And the real trick is going to be having managers, having educators, having companies like Coursera reskill people so that they can take advantage of these tools and using them for the parts of their job that are affected while doing the other part with humans. And that combination of humans and machines, one of Barbara's colleagues, Paul Doherty, wrote a book called Humans Plus Machines, is really where the benefits are going to emerge. But I think ultimately this is a bigger tidal wave than just about any other technology over the past 20 or 30 years.
I have a follow-up question for you, because you and I have talked for a while about sort of the dawn of this next generation of AI.
Yep.
And it's always interesting to me that when they interview Sam Altman at OpenAI, or they interview Microsoft, or Meta, or Google, they're stunned by how much ChatGPT took off as a consumer product.
Yeah.
What surprised you the most about the ChatGPT moment? As someone who has been looking at this for so long, has been trying to see the future, what about this moment that we are all in struck you as most surprising?
Well, there were two things. First off, the takeoff of ChatGPT was surprising. Mira Murati, who's the chief technology officer at OpenAI, I had her over for dinner, and she was describing the evening when she was launching it. She was talking to her boyfriend, she said, and she was describing how, oh yeah, I have to just put finishing touches on this thing that's going out tomorrow morning. It's no big deal. And it was like 8 or 9 p.m. She's working a little late, took a little longer, and so she was going to send it off and then go to work. And they were just caught off guard by how quickly it took off. But that was a lot because of the user interface. I think the more surprising thing is what's under the hood. These large language models are able to solve a lot of problems that nobody thought they were able to solve. They're getting like 90% on the uniform bar exam. There's a paper called Sparks of Artificial and General Intelligence that lists dozens of areas where they have been able to match or surpass humans. And when I talk to the technologists who are building the models, the guys building the models, they did not expect that. They did not think that it would be able to write code. That was not part of what they designed it to do. It figured out on its own how to write Python. They did not expect it to be able to translate languages when they didn't have language pairs. You could just give it one language, and it figured out what that meant in other languages. So there's a set of emergent behavior that's thrilling. It's also a little spooky in some ways. But one question I've been asking my colleagues at Stanford, at MIT, the guys in the Valley is, like, did you expect this to happen? And almost uniformly, they're like, no, this is more than what we expected.
Barbara, when you hear this, when you hear an AI expert say, I didn't realize that large language models could do all of this, when you read that it's something like 10% of the people working on artificial intelligence in the Bay Area think this technology has a non-zero chance of killing all of us, how do you maintain your optimism that we can marshal this technology for good, that we can direct this toward an ethical end rather than a bunch of AI-inflected chaos?
Yes. I stay optimistic because we are in the infancy of this technology. So we have the opportunity to bring everybody in. Nobody should be left behind. We can train from the top down and vice versa. It has taken off because it's so accessible. Why is it different? A discussion this morning of how Gen AI is taken off versus metaverse. You need some skills to work in metaverse. Not that you don't need skills in Gen AI, but it is conditionally encouraged for you to get in on the platform and try it out. And so once you start doing that, some of the fear would dissipate, and then you'll be able to drive it home for your business or your brand. But let's not forget that it is accessible to everyone. There's not anyone, we didn't bring phones out, okay, but there's not anyone without a phone or a laptop or an iPad. It is open, so everyone can give it a try. And I encourage you to do that from the age of, how young are we seeing kids with iPads on up? And then to bring this into the schools. We have an opportunity to not leave anyone behind, to be representative of everyone in this room. Take a snapshot of this room, and this is what Gen AI should look like. Accessible, learning, the training, and bring it forward. And that's how it's going to continue to move. That's how I stay optimistic, because we have that opportunity to do that.
Jeff, I want to hold on optimism, but I also don't want to hold on optimism, and I want to go to pessimism. I want to make sure that I check all of the boxes here. You know, education is a really interesting space with the implications of ChatGPT, because there are so many stories of students in colleges, in high schools, using this technology to essentially write their papers, right? Write me a history of the Habsburg Empire. It's easy to just ask ChatGPT to do this, and it will do it for you. You can tell it to edit it, you know, make it appropriate for an 11th grade class, add a metaphor, you know, that's based in nature in paragraph 5. Are you concerned about, or are you acting to make sure that the education that you're providing makes it harder for people to cheat their education?
Yes. I mean, for sure. I don't know how many of you are educators. There's a lot of cheating happening, a lot of cheating. And it's tricky. It's tricky to detect. My sense is with a few clever adjustments, you'll be able to make it so that it's too difficult to detect by technology. What we see universities doing now, so what we're doing with Coach is it's pretty obvious. Like, Coach knows this little bot. It knows what questions are in the courses. And so if you ask it to solve it, it'll say, hey, I know that that's one of the questions in the course. I'm not going to answer it. Could you copy and paste that into ChatGPT? Yes, but usually the questions need context, and then you're starting to copy and paste a lot of the course. It's quite a bit of a hassle. But in those instances where universities are granting credit, they'll often try to have a controlled environment. So they'll say, do all your formative assessments online, come into the classroom, and I'll watch you take the test and make sure you're not using this. Also, there's similar kind of proctoring that's available virtually. Well, the webcam will come on and they'll make sure that you're not cheating. I think ultimately, though, where we're going to need to go is new types of assessments, some that really require a lot of context. And so if you don't have that, the model doesn't have that, then it'll not be able to provide good answers. But to a large degree, I look at as a formal English major, you know, when we did math, you don't just give the answer, you show your work. And showing your work shows an understanding of the concepts and a transparency of the thinking process that arrived at the final answer. With English and writing, generally, you know, the writing is kind of the demonstration of your thinking. But now when the robot can do the writing and the thinking, you have to show that you did it. I suspect that more assessment is going to go towards what was the thinking process that created this output, and even what was the learning process that engaged the thinking process to create this output.
Right.
We can track learning process. We can track, by extension, thinking process. And I think that's what most of this is going to be about. People need to use this thinking tool in the workplace. If you don't, you'll be severely disadvantaged. So you want to try to figure out how can you let people learn this tool and not have it be something where they can cheat on the final exams.
I think that's a great way to think about it, because it's absolutely true that you can get around learning entirely by using it to write essays, which means that you're essentially outsourcing your entire knowledge of that subject to ChatGPT, versus thinking of it more like a word processing software, right? So I don't know how to spell anything. That doesn't matter, actually, in 2023, because, I'm a writer. It's pretty embarrassing that I can't spell. But I write in software that checks all of my spelling. So how important is it really that I know how to spell? It's as if what is valued in writing has been squeezed from the ability to spell words, the ability to organize thoughts, and now I can take more of my cognitive load and put that toward organizing my essays rather than worrying like how to spell highfalutin or something.
That's exactly
Erik.
right way. I just finished teaching my course, grading papers, etc., and I tried to lean in to using these tools. I knew, of course, my students would have access to them, and there's one response which is like, we've got to ban them from using them, we've got to have them write stuff by paper and pen or cameras or whatever. I said, look, go ahead, use them, but use it to not only show your work, but also it puts more work on me as a professor to write assignments that take things up a level, that get them to think. I had them do some where they interacted with the LLM and they talked about how they use it as a kind of a coach, a partner to think through a different type of a process. And I think your example of word processor is great, or a calculator. There was a time we spent a lot of time teaching people how to do like long division, and that's probably not a skill we need to have people spend a lot of time perfecting right now. But moving things up a level, asking the right questions and understanding where the LLM is being helpful and where it's not being helpful, that's a skill that we need to learn how to teach people. And I think it's a generalizable point that not just for teaching, but for all of the people here who have employees or they're coaching their kids or whatever, you want to think about what are the new things that you can be doing. And if we use these tools right, we're going to not just be able to do the same things cheaper, we're going to be able to do new things. We're going to be a flourishing of creativity, of art, of writing, of thinking that we didn't have before because we've got this turbocharger to help us work through the problems.
Jeff?
Yeah, there's another thing people I think miss in terms of the opportunity side of this, which is traditionally our evaluation of people's thinking is based on the clarity of their writing. And that's just kind of a natural thing. But we do a lot of work in different countries where English might be a second language. I think the idea, to your point, that the expression of the idea is not the thing that's going to be the most important. It's going to be the novelty and the insight of the idea. To some degree, though, these models will allow people to be judged on the quality of their thinking rather than their expression in a given language. And I think that could really equalize things so that English speakers, which is generally the language of business, no longer confers as much of an advantage in the way people judge the quality of your thoughts, because your expression will be on a level playing field.
I'll give a really short example of that. One of my colleagues was trying to read a proposal by one of his PhD students for some research, and he couldn't make sense of it. He put it through ChatGPT, and he's like, oh, and then he showed it to her, and he said, is this what you were trying to say? And she's like, yeah, that's what I was trying to say. And it was really quite helpful. She was not a native English speaker. Another friend of mine who's an engineer, he says all his life he's felt like he's been unable to properly express. He's not a good writer like you, Derek, and so he's been hindered. And I think it's going to open up the possibility of a lot of people to express some really interesting ideas that were previously kind of locked in there, and that would be a very hopeful outcome.
I think it's a really wonderful thought and a good time to a good place to end this. Thank you all very much for listening, and thanks to our panel.